So the best method to apply the oil is using the buffing method. So what we want to do is, using the rotary machine, we can apply a white pad with an oiling cloth attached to it, and then what we'll do is apply a small amount of the oil to the floor. We'll just pour about 25 ml on, and then what we'll do is work that into the floor and work it around, and that buffs it into the floor. So the product that we use for oiling is the Bonner Craft Oil 2K. So this is a two-part component oil, so you have the main oil and the hardener, and what we do is we mix those together, and once we mix it, it creates the chemical reaction for it to go off. So the craft oil comes in just a natural, but it also comes in a range of different colours, from like a frost, which is like a white, up to like different darker shades of reds and browns and blacks. The 2K oil is a tough product as a standalone, but it's also advantages that it can be over coated with the traffic lacquer. So if you want to put it into a high traffic area, you can also make it really durable as well. So a wood oil is perfect to use on what we would class as like occasional floors, or low traffic areas, or on what we call designer floors. So if you've got an occasional dining room in a high-end property that's looking for a real high-end finish, then the oil is perfect for that. If it is in a kitchen or a high traffic area, then what we need to do is obviously apply the Traffic HD over the top to give it its durability. But an oil works well on higher end, better quality woods. They tend to take to the wood better, they take into the grain and create like a stunning finish. So the colour oils like the frost, you just get this light element of white that takes into the grain, and it's a real sort of stunning high-end finish. Where the oils don't go so well is, for instance, on like pine floors. They just don't take well, they go a bit patchy and they're just not suited to that type of floor. But for your high-end sort of luxury designer floor finish, then the 2K craft oil is the perfect option. Okay, so the common issues with oils is generally it's down to the quality of your sanding and the scratch pattern. So if you can get a real good consistent scratch pattern, then it's going to make your final result of your oil much better. If you've sort of left impressions in from your 60 and 80 grits on your zirconias, then they're going to be highlighted when the oil goes into the wood. One of the other issues normally with oils is that you can get crossover marks, but the Bonner 2K craft oils are quite forgiving on this, and you don't tend to get overlap marks. But what you will need to do is mask up and protect the skirtings, because obviously the colour oils, if they touch any of the skirtings, any woodwork around the room, door frames, then obviously they will stain and colour those areas as well. Okay, so now we're going to look how to actually apply the oil. So the oil is applied in two stages. So step one is where we work the oil in, and then step two is where we remove and buff off any excess oil. So step one, what we want to do is again wrap the pad with an oiling cloth, fold in the corners and attach it to the machine. What I like to do is remove the tank, even if it's empty, just so you don't get any little bits of water or anything that might cause any issues. I tend to mix up my oil, have it in the container, and then I'm ready to go. So what you want to do first is work the oil in to your edges and cut them into the floor about 6 inches in. So you can either do this with a cloth, an oiling cloth, a paintbrush, or the applicator. Okay, so if you are using an oil that's different, contains colour rather than just the natural oil that we're using here, then what you want to do is make sure you mask everywhere up so you don't change the tone or get any colour onto the actual the woodwork around the edge. So this panelling was actually finished with the same clear oil, and what we're trying to do is actually bring the floor. The idea is to bring the floor in line with the actual panels on the edge of the room. So what we've done there, we've applied 25mm in a couple of areas, and now what we're doing is just working it in. So the idea of this stage is to actually saturate the wood with the oil and allow it to soak in. So what we're going to do is we are going to work it in. We're not going to leave big areas of pooling or areas where it's very wet. So we are going to work it round and work it in, but what we want to then do is leave it for 20 minutes, half an hour, to actually soak into the wood, and then once that's happened we'll perform step 2. So what we're doing is just working in nice sections that we can reach back to, and just spending plenty of time sort of massaging the oil into the actual woodwork. Again, if there's any floor sockets, any ins and outs, just detail them by hand as you go. But what the aim is that we're going to work all the way out of the room, leave the floor 15 minutes to half an hour, and then we'll go back in and start again, which you'll see shortly on step 2, the buffing off stage. So there you go, I'm just applying small amounts across the room, and I'm just sort of working back kind of metre by metre from wall to wall. Okay, so as we're doing it, we can see that the wood is sort of really enriching, and the oil is really enriching the wood, bringing all the detail, all the finish back out, just really, enhancing it and giving it that real high-end sort of showroom finish. What I've also got there is just a little handheld vac that stood up, so I just keep that on hand. If you get any little bits of hair, any little bits of sort of grit, or you'll get a few little bits that come off your oiling cloth, stuff like that, just vac them as you go, just so you're not getting anything drying into the floor that will just impair the end result. Okay, one thing you'll notice there is that I'm actually leaning and having the oil just resting on a cloth, so if I've got any drips from my tin or my container or anything like that, it's not dripping and soaking into the floor. It's just going to be absorbed by that towel. One other thing to note is obviously I've got my hotel slippers on there, so what we don't want to be doing is walking in wet on muddy footprints at this point. We just want to get some like indoor shoes, overshoes, or just working your socks, and just keep any sort of the outside contaminants to a minimum. So as you can see, just sort of keeping it sort of nicely sort of damp, just enough product but not too much, and we're just really working it around. And if you've got sections where you've got too much, just kind of work your machine onto a dry piece of wood, and that will just sort of take a bit of the excess off, and then you can just work back into your area, and you're just spreading it around and just sort of saturating and filling up the wood as you go along. Again, one thing to consider is obviously the route that you're going to take. So if you've got sort of ins and outs, you need to sort of consider your plug sockets, where you're plugging the machine in, obviously where your exits are from the room, so you can kind of work back to the exit, keeping the machine going, because what you don't want to be doing is sort of, once you've oiled an area, is wheeling the rubber wheels, anything like that, across it, because you might leave wheel marks in the floor. So you can see now, as I'm working through the floor, I'm almost putting smaller amounts down, because my cloth, is starting to get saturated. That's got quite a lot of oil in it. I'm just using what's in there and just adding a little bit more to the floor, and sort of getting kind of larger areas now out of less oil. So the oils do go a long way. The coverage rates are very big on them. So it's, with an oil, it's kind of less is more. We're not using anywhere near as much as we do when we're using like a lacquer. Okay, so now that section's all buffed in, what we're going to do is work out to the door and then just leave that for 20 minutes, half an hour, just to soak in. And then what we're going to do is start step 2, where we'll buff and remove all the excess of the oil. Okay, so now step 2 of the oiling process is where we're going to just remove all the excess and just buff the floor back to a clean, residue-free finish of any oil or product. So all we're going to do is get a fresh oiling cloth, apply it to the pad as normal, attached to the machine, and then basically just go back to the start and we're not applying any more product, we're literally just buffing off all the excess and just working it around and into the floor. Okay, so what we want to do, we want to get to a point where we're just working back, removing any footprints, anything like that from where we worked. Again, deal with any bit of dust or hairs, fabric, anything from your cloth that's come off. Just kind of deal with that as you go along. But we're just going to spend that time now and just really sort of working it into the floor. Again, it's just sort of buffing it up, giving it that little bit more of lust, and just improving the appearance, and that's just going to create that stunning finish